Okay, good morning, class. Today, instead of live lesson, we will be having a recorded lesson. So you'll be viewing this video, and then I want you to take out your worksheets as you view this video, you filled up the blanks in your worksheet. Okay, after going through this lecture, you will go on to some practices in the SLS. Last lesson, we look at transnational terrorism. We look at the three types of impact of transnational terrorism on countries, namely political, economic, and social impact. We also look at examples of terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, Jamia Islamiyah in Singapore, and we also look at individuals who does not belong to groups, okay, but they are being self-radicalized online and they carry out terrorist act. So in this lesson, we will go on to look at strategies to manage transnational terrorism. The three types of strategies are preventive measure, protective measures, and responsive measures. In the first part of this lecture, we will look at the three categories of measures, after which we will look at how countries will face trade-off in trying to implement this measure and at the same time manage the conflicting needs of the country and individual. Okay, let's look at preventive measures. From the word preventive, okay, the meaning is to deter, okay, to prevent any loss of life or destruction to the economy and society. That means before terrorist threat or terrorist attack happened, something has already been done to stop uh, this terrorist threat from happening. Okay, the aim is to reduce the country's vulnerability to transnational terrorist threats. And there are two types of preventive measures. They are effective border controls as well as collaboration between countries. Okay, let's look at effective border controls. How many of you have traveled overseas before? Even though I can't see your hands, but I'm sure we have at least traveled either by land, sea, or air and have at least crossed through a checkpoint before. So in Singapore, the Immigration and Checkpoint Authority, as you can see in the slide, okay, this is the agency that is responsible for protecting our borders. So what they have done is that they have developed specialized capabilities, okay, such as our biometric technology, the fingerprinting, okay, and the radiographic image analysis of all the cargo goods which are crossing our borders. So with all these specialized capability, it will be able to help us to track the movement of people and goods that are crossing our borders. So in the event that there is any suspicious weapons or uh, people that are terrorists that are trying to get in, uh, they will be able to uh, stop and deter them from coming into Singapore. Besides Singapore, we also look at USA. After the September 11 attack that we looked at in our last lesson, USA have implemented uh, this no-fly list since 2001. Okay, as you can see in the slide, the no-fly list refers to names of individuals who are suspected of being terrorists. So for Americans who are suspected of being terrorists and they are outside of USA, they are placed on the list. They will not be allowed to board a plane to return back to US. For non-Americans who are in USA already and then they are suspected terrorists, they will not be allowed to board a plane to return to their home country. Okay, so this is how the no-fly list work in USA. And similarly in Canada, it is quite similar to the no-fly list, but it has another name called the Passenger Protection Program. And that is to put restriction on those suspected terrorists from entering the country. And of course, if we implement the effective border control, there are trade-offs. And for USA, under the Universal of Declaration of Human Rights, which states that individuals should have the freedom to move where they want to. So with the no-fly list, individual will be restricted. They will not be able to get back to America. They will not be able to come out of America. So these are some trade-offs, okay, that a country will have to bear when they implement such measure. Okay, the second type of preventive measures is collaboration between countries. Because transnational terrorism is very much global in nature, as we talk about globalization, it causes countries to be interconnected and interdependent. So definitely collaboration is necessary in order for us to manage terrorism. And so United Nations, the Security Council resolution was passed after the September 11 attack. And then under this resolution, the UN encourage countries to share intelligence on individuals or groups that are planning or practicing terrorist act, so that countries can collaborate and cooperate with one another to take action against them. Another example of collaboration between countries is through the ASEAN Counter-Terrorism Workshop. You see many uh, instances where Singapore collaborates with ASEAN. So for transnational terrorism, Singapore also collaborated with ASEAN. It is one platform where the ASEAN countries will come together. They have this ASEAN Counter-Terrorism Workshop, as you can see in the slide, okay, where the countries exchange best practices to enhance the terrorism collaboration in the region to prevent attacks. Okay, the last example that we are looking at is the US-led Container Security Initiative, also known as CSI, and Singapore is a member of this CSI. So what does the CSI do? Okay, the CSI recognizes the potential danger posed by uh, illicit seaborne cargo, which means illegal seaborne cargo, such as bomb-making materials. So in order to manage this threat, the containers which are supposed to be going to America, okay, they will be screened first before they are allowed to be shipped to the ports in USA. So this is to ensure that there is maritime safety in countries. So we have just finished the first part, which is preventive measures, which consists of effective border controls as well as collaboration between countries. Okay, we'll be moving on to protective measures. So for protective measures, they are supposed to work hand in hand with the preventive measures, and that will help to enhance the security of the country. And there are two types of protective measures, namely the first one, which is surveillance, and the second one, which is indefinite detention without trial. So for surveillance, it refers to increased vigilance to ensure the safety of citizens. So surveillance are being enhanced in key uh, infrastructure like our power station, our water supply station, and maybe as well as where we stockpile our food. Okay, so these are key infrastructure, as well as public places where there are a lot of people like MRT, etc. Okay, where there are a large number of people and which are very vulnerable to terrorist attack. So Singapore has deployed land, sea, and air surveillance. So the Singapore Armed Forces have been working very closely. The police force and the Coast Guard have been guarding the sea and land uh, and access to Jurong Island, which is mainly uh, where we have our oil refineries. And then the Navy as well as the Coast Guard will guard our sea line of communication. And in fact, if you read the recent newspaper, they say that it is all the more important for us to guard our sea line of communication because Nowadays, our food supply mainly quite a huge percentage come by the sea. And then the Singapore Air Force also work very closely with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore to guard our sky. So all these agencies work together to watch over our land, sea, and air to make sure that there are no suspicious activities or potential terrorist threats. Okay, we have seen how Singapore deploys surveillance. So now let's look at USA. So for USA, they have deployed full body scanners, as you can see in the slide. Okay, the full body scanners was introduced to identify any hidden object under the passenger's clothes. Okay, but there's a trade-off. The trade-off is that yes, you can scan in detail and then find out if if the Americans bring with them dangerous weapons. But the trade-off is that the full body scanners give a lot of details of the human private parts, and that has violated the privacy uh, rights under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in 2013, the scanner were replaced, and these scanners revealed fewer details. Now let's move on to the second protective measure, which is indefinite detention without trial. Indefinite detention means you keep the person, okay, without going through any trial. So in Singapore, we implemented the Internal Security Act. It is a law that enables the Singapore government to uh, keep any potential suspected terrorists and to detain them without any trial. So this act came about after the September 11 attack. So in 2012, two members of the JI were detained under the ISA because they have undergone uh, terrorist training in Afghanistan with the Al Qaeda, and they were actively monitoring potential targets for terrorist attack in Singapore. So similarly, USA have something which is similar to Singapore ISA. Is called the Patriot Act. So under this act, it gives the US government the rights to arrest, detain, and seize the property of anyone who is suspected of being involved in terrorism activities. So the suspect, they are held indefinitely without trial, and sometimes they are deported, means they are being sent back to their home country, and they are not given a chance to challenge the decision. So these measures are unpopular with those human rights groups because they feel that it is a form of abuse. So people are treated badly during the detention, and they are not given a chance to be tried fairly. So these are some tensions or trade-offs the government will have to face, okay, when they implement such uh, a measure which is the indefinite detention without trial. So we have covered the protective measures, which is surveillance and indefinite detention without trial. Under these two, we have looked at two examples from two countries, which is namely Singapore and USA. Let's move on to the last type of measure, which is responsive measures.